Welcome to Grammar Skills Module 4. In this module, we're going to talk about fused sentences and comma splices. So let's first of all begin by defining what a fused sentence is. We also call that a run-on sentence. That occurs when two independent clauses, so two clauses that can stand alone as a sentence, are joined either with no punctuation whatsoever, or a connecting word or conjunction between them, or possibly only a comma, which again is called a comma splice. So a couple of examples here. Spring was here is one independent clause. The daffodils were in bloom is another independent clause. There's nothing in between those two. That's a fused sentence or a run-on sentence. I like the sciences, comma. I love my chemistry 104 class. Again, I like the sciences is an independent clause. I love my chemistry 104 class is an independent clause. We cannot just have a comma in between them. All right, so the challenge in this module will be on the following exercise slides. You will see the same fused sentence over and over again. But what I will do is ask you to solve that in a different way using a different option, just to sort of walk you through the different possibilities of how you can avoid it and how you can connect the two independent clauses in a more effective way. All right, so in exercise 1, I would like you to correct the fused sentences by separating the two independent clauses with a period. Again, if you are watching this as a video and if you need more time, please feel free to pause the video at this point. All right, so answer 1 is spring was here, period. The daffodils were in bloom, period. So while this may not be the most sophisticated choice, a period in between two independent clauses will always be correct. So if you solve it that way, there will never be any question of its correctness. Exercise 2. Here, I would like you to correct the fused sentence by separating the two independent clauses with a semicolon. The answer to exercise 2 is spring was here, semicolon. The daffodils were in bloom. So again, although the period in the previous example is always a correct choice, the semicolon may be slightly more effective because what it does is it signals that the two independent clauses are thematically related. Talking about spring and talking about spring flowers being in bloom in the other. So the semicolon, even though it functions very similarly to a period, will automatically indicate that there is some relationship thematically between the two parts that it separates. For exercise 3, I would like you to link the two independent clauses using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. The answer to exercise 3 is spring was here, comma, so the daffodils were in bloom. So we can connect two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction, obviously. In this case, since these two clauses suggest kind of a cause and effect relationship, that these spring flowers are in bloom because now spring is here, the coordinating conjunction so is probably going to be your most effective choice. The one thing I would like you to refrain from is using the coordinating conjunction and in everything. Spring was here and the daffodils were in bloom. For the most part, I would reserve the coordinating conjunction and when you have a list of multiple things, this and this and that. Okay? Here, so is more effective because it does explain the cause and effect relationship. Okay? And remember that the coordinating conjunction here always has to be preceded by a comma. In exercise 4, I would like you to connect the two independent clauses by making spring was here a dependent clause by adding a subordinating conjunction to it. And the answer here is because spring was here, comma, the daffodils were in bloom. So we've talked about the fact that there's a cause and effect relationship between these two statements. So because spring was here, okay, therefore something has happened, and in this case the daffodils were blossoming. Okay, so therefore because or since potentially would be the most effective choices for a subordinating conjunction. Okay. The other thing I would just like to remind you about is we're beginning the sentence with the dependent clause. Again, the dependent clause is the one that starts with the subordinating conjunction. We're ending the sentence with the independent clause. The daffodils were in bloom. So those two clauses have to be separated by a comma because we are beginning with the dependent one. Exercise 5. Here I would like you to connect the two independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb. And one of the possible answers here is spring was here, semicolon, therefore, comma, the daffodils were in bloom. Okay, so we've addressed the fact that it's a cause and effect relationship. In the situation, therefore is probably a strong choice, okay, as a conjunctive adverb. And just remember, whenever we are connecting two independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb, it has to be preceded by a semicolon and it has to be followed by a comma. In exercise 6, I would like you to connect the two independent clauses by making the daffodils were in bloom a dependent clause by adding a subordinating conjunction. One possible answers for exercise 6 is it was the time of year when daffodils are in bloom. So in this version, the specific reference to spring is actually replaced with an independent clause. It was the time of the year. So this defines spring rather than actually mentioning it. Okay? And it is followed by a dependent clause that begins with the subordinating conjunction when daffodils are in bloom. Okay. Just remember that if we are ending a sentence with the dependent clause, so again, it was the time of year is the independent clause, when daffodils are in bloom is the dependent clause. If we're ending with that, there is no comma between the independent clause at the beginning and the dependent clause at the end.